This podcast is brought to you by the Disabled But Not Really Foundation, a local Kansas City nonprofit organization that pushes to instill a physical limitless mindset that breeds courage, confidence, and competence within the disabled community. You can follow and support Disabled But Not Really on social media or go visit their website at disabledbutnotreally.org. Their work and their mission is to really impact communities and make more people understand the benefits of inclusivity.
And I want to close this blind a little bit more. It's feeling a little too bright.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's Wesley and myself. Good morning, Wesley Hamilton.
Good morning, April. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm all like, and you're like, what's up?
It's mid-July, and life has just been pretty settled. I've just had to take some time. I haven't had to work so much, like speak and travel. So it's been hot.
Yes, literally, literally very hot.
And so it's like it's hot, then it rains. I don't know if it happens like that everywhere, but it's definitely been happening like that here. It's like you never get a good day. So today has been a good one. So I'm just kind of settled, starting my week, and excited about this conversation.
I am excited too. And for all of you out there, thank you for joining us this morning. Or if you're joining us at a time that isn't this morning, thank you. We love it. We have an amazing guest on who I have an affinity for because when I went through a really huge transition in my life, like going from being someone who's working to having my own business and just stepping more into like my power and my authority and knowing what I wanted. Gina, you were one of the very first people to interview me and welcome me in. And it felt good to see a face of familiarity. We were going into a space that was predominantly white women, and you connected with me and just brought me in. And it just shows the power of seeing a reflection of yourself in some way, shape, or form. And that's why we have you here. This is Gina Winstead, everyone. She powerhouse. I'll let you tell more about yourself, but I just wanted people to know, like, you have been an advocate. You have not just advocated for others, for yourself, right? And for others. And you have, when you talk about boots on the ground, like you will be at a protest, you will be at a county meeting, you will speak truth and you'll bring truth to light. And we're so happy to have you on. So welcome, Ms. Gina.
Thank you so much for having me here, April and Wesley. This is my first time and it feels amazing so far. It's a nice chill vibe this Sunday. So I'm glad to spend it with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Because we know, all of us have busy lives. As Wes was saying, this is the first time in a while he hasn't been traveling and speaking and working. So we honor
to be like that.
Absolutely.
So we want you to tell a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and share with the people, Gina.
Yeah, I'm happy to introduce myself. So Gina Winstead, I use she, they pronouns. I identify as somebody who's gender nonconforming, genderqueer, and I'm from the city of Pittsburgh, born and raised. And I have really been throwing myself into the work of helping people from different communities that haven't been invested in historically, necessarily in Pittsburgh, but also outside of Pittsburgh, for the greater good of the people all over. So right now I am the inaugural vice president for inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. All them hands at, and I just hit my 2-year anniversary, and that is with the Carnegie Museums. So I am the VP of what we have coined the acronym of IDEA or IDEA. And I'm loving this work. I've been doing this work for about a decade now with other institutions. Prior to coming to the Carnegie Museums, I was with an organization called Vibrant Pittsburgh, which really focuses on being the city and the region's key points person and of economic data around race and inclusion in the workplace. And prior to working for Vibrant Pittsburgh, I was the first director of diversity at the Pittsburgh Technology Council. So doing this in a first type of role is something that I'm familiar with and comfortable with, but it's definitely a challenge. And I'm just excited to continue to do this work. A little bit about me personally. I live in the city of Pittsburgh. I bought my first home about 3 years ago in the neighborhood of Brookline, and it's been something that's super exciting to lean into. I just adopted a puppy that is 5 months old. His name is Potato. And yeah, I have a fiance that I live with, and we're trying to live the life of the elder millennial in this society right now. So that's me.
I love it. I love it. Well, welcome. Thank you for the introduction. So quick thing, everybody, this is our 42nd episode. If you know that we started this journey, 2020. Yeah. But this topic is ableism and equity. And Gina, as you were sharing, like some of the things that you just credentials, right? And I love that. A question that came to my mind was, what are some of the challenges that you have faced just forward when it comes to trying to advocate for disability within the spaces of DEI? And that was just really just kind of understanding diversity, but not really understanding like the DEI space within like the institutions that you were in. So whether it was the technology space or like the museum space, like the conversations around it. I know we were going to dial into it in a little bit, April, but it's Disability Pride Month, and I want to, so shout out to my folks. And so, but it was one of those things that just really, if you could share, Gina, like, because I'm sure some of our listeners are like, yeah, what's this ableism? But has there been some like dialogue around trying to make sure that the language within like the individuals that you work with are constructed in a more, I would say, concise way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenges come up in many different ways. So there's always like structural challenges, financial challenges, things that you can expect. But then there's also the awareness and the ableism that is baked into our society as a whole. And so just starting with kind of like maybe the most obvious challenge. I work in a very large old institution. Our building was built in like 1895. Wow. It's a historic building. So for us at the Carnegie Museums, or at Carnegie Museums, not we really have to work to try to make sure that our building is staying up with the current, and not just the current legal, but the current best practices for making sure that our building is accessible. And that can be really hard whenever you have something that is made out of marble from over 125 years ago. And certain things need to stay a certain way. And so really just finding the money to do this work can be very, very difficult. And I think that is something that any organization faces, no matter the size. I mean, I have talked to small companies that have like 5 employees in one building, and they're struggling to figure out how to find money to build a ramp to make their front steps accessible, right? They may just have 3 steps. We're talking about many different levels of finance that can prevent this work from happening, and finding what are those foundations that are investing in the population that is trying to make the space more accessible, and what can you allocate from your operational budget and the money that you may be pulling in other ways, and make sure that it is going to creating a space physically that is accessible. And that's just like the physical financial challenges. There are many more ways and challenges financially that prevents places and spaces from being accessible. You see, we have an ASL translator here with us today, or interpreter here with us today. And even that can be cost prohibitive for companies and businesses. Carnegie Museums makes available any accommodation that is necessary for folks to visit us and try to come to our events and things like our summer camps. And oftentimes we need to make sure that we have a translator available for us at every event or at the full course of a camp. So that can be something that people aren't thinking of, and that's that ableism mindset that we're really trying to work on, and making sure that things are accessible at every single step of the way is very, very difficult. And that starts with an awareness campaign. So just reminding people of what can they do individually in their roles, in their personal lives, in their work lives, to think about how people with different abilities than they have may need different accommodations to show up and to enjoy and to explore fully in the same way that they are. And so, like you said, Wesley, it's Disability Pride Month, as we are celebrating the anniversary of the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. So we really want to right now make sure in our workplaces that we're talking about that we're reminding people that, there are contributions from people from the disability community that we should be praising and that we should be thinking about. And those people often are forgotten. And sometimes people are very, very successful, and they're a part of the disability community. And often it's just like reminding people that this person is extremely successful. They are part of the disability community. One of the people that comes straight to the top of my mind is our President Biden, who lives and has been very open about being somebody who suffers from having a stutter. And I don't even really want to use the word suffer, but somebody who has dealt with the fact of having a stutter his entire life. And he has overcome that. And he's very open about it. And even myself, I'm very open about the things that I struggle with personally. I consider myself, and I use the language of being neurodivergent because I have ADHD, and I'm a late diagnosed ADHD adult. And I also have been dealt the hand of generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder. And I talk about that. I explicitly talk about it whenever I publicly speak, and sometimes mention it at the beginning of a talk to raise that awareness and to help people think differently, and to kind of deconstruct the ableism that they're built with. But I think if all of us just think about probably 5 people in our lives right now, one of them will likely have a different ability or a disability that they are living with right now. So it's really just getting that awareness, and that helps us to get over those challenges. Wesley, just bringing it back to your question, making sure that we can figure out a way to eventually articulate the need for funding, raise the awareness, and get the thing to happen is a big struggle and a challenge for me in any company. It's not specific to where I am professionally.
No, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I think awareness campaigns are very important. So anyone that's listening, hopefully your company is pushing something.
Right.
There's a lot of books that just share, stories and experiences that you can learn from if that is your level of need for awareness as a company. Just so many ways, and podcasting, and you could probably just you could Google probably a disability advocate, that is on a podcast interview to hear their perspective or listen to challenges. It's just, or what is it, TTU, TikTok University.
That's what he called TikTok University.
You could definitely find. I'm not gonna say everything is valid, but a balance in facts and non-facts. But even my platforms, I try to share constant experiences of like awareness. I referenced yesterday, I just shared it was an older video of me just showing how accessible tub in a hotel was, in my mind, accessible to the state of mind. And more or less, I just showed me getting in the tub, where the bench was, and then how far it was for me to reach to the handles, and I couldn't reach it.
Yeah.
And I just shared that most people still think of accessibility as something that you need to depend on someone with. So a lot of structures and access is being created where I need help. Like, of
That's a
course,
good point, Wes.
bench is in the back because someone else would be in the front to wash me up, which would be the structure if I was in a hospital.
And that doesn't support independence.
It doesn't support independence,
No.
you know. So, and again, old hotel probably, you know, maybe they did it right when the 88 began or something. I don't know when it was structured or when it, but these are things that we're coming in contact with. And I think it's always just, again, you could do your research to figure out like what are the challenges? Because sometimes I look at it and say, well, if you just change the handle and put it over here on the wall, then we're good. You know, someone else could look at it and be like, oh man, we got to build out a whole new, you know, and it's like, it's really not that cost effective. And Gina, if you don't know, like I am definitely in a wheelchair. I'm just not rolling around right now. I'm paralyzed from the waist down. So, so for me, my level of awareness is not just from I'm very independent too. So I really use myself as that vessel to understand what the barriers are that most people really don't face because they fear the access isn't there. And so, again, you got a lot of people that do that. So thank you for sharing even about like older buildings. Most people don't talk about, we hear it all the time, like, oh, it was grandfathered in, or that's a term that at least they use over here in Missouri.
And even that term, so many terms are problematic too, like the term of grandfathering in.
That's so sexist, right? That's so patriarchal.
Like we can dig into, I mean, from at least what we hear over here is like it shouldn't be utilized
right
at all, you know, and so they're trying to break like that, but it's more or less it's my way or the highway. That's what it sounds like. But to understand older buildings, understand maybe how they were made or structured, what does it look like to bring in accessibility? But then I travel the world, and when you go around the world and you start to see like Greece creating access in certain areas, and like you said, funding too, but we have to have America change their perception on disability to put funding into access.
Yeah.
Like that's really it. Like you can't just, you have to see yourself in the position of the people you serve. And we still don't do that, you know, but when we sprain an ankle, we do, you know, we'll share a story with somebody, say I was in a wheelchair for 6 months. I relate to you, but at the same time but you go back to a normal life and don't realize that you can go back to the same situation. So we need to just figure out how that universal design concept kind of applies to everything. Right? Like even within older structures or newer structures, how do we make sure that we're serving us when we want to access this later on in life? It's like we create the barriers for ourselves. So we fear the barriers that we see other people live.
Yeah, that fear is a big thing. Gina, I really appreciate you being so open and honest with who you are, the multidimensional aspect of yourself. And that, I think that's beautiful because that's humanity, right? Like you're like, I have an invisible disability, right? I identify as queer, non-binary, like, and you're able to say all these things. And how did you begin to feel comfortable, or did you ever feel not comfortable sharing all those things? Because in my eyes, I see that, and it adds to my feelings of like, that's a strong person of character. That's a strong person. Even, you know, when you're like, hey, I have these ADHD, I suffer anxiety, I do this, all of that, and you being able to bring that out to light, it's like, that's admirable. Was that a journey for you to come to that point, or was it your background, just how you were raised? If you feel comfortable sharing about that, I would love to have you share that with us.
Yeah. And so, Wesley, thank you so much for sharing more about yourself too. And for me, I recognize the privilege in having a disability that most people can't notice. And it's interesting because for me, I'm like, I notice it, I see it, I feel it. And I think that's how all of us are. Like, it's like whenever it's related to us or someone close to us, we're like, yeah, Gina definitely has ADHD and anxiety, right? But what has happened is I recognize that I got really, really good at masking, or the term that a lot of folks use, or kind of like hiding that is something that I'm suffering with. And I got so good that it created more anxiety, because I'm like, well, now people have no idea that I'm dealing with such a huge roadblock, that they're not expecting me to like have any type of effect because of my ADHD or my anxiety, whenever it's affecting me greatly all the time. And so I found that I needed to be more open and honest about it. And then whenever I started to be more open and honest about it, I would say it was probably only within like the last 10 years and in my professional life. But when I started to do that and I would talk about it, people would come up to me afterwards and they would say, thank you so much. I can't believe you have anxiety. I have horrible, like debilitating anxiety. And to see you get up there and speak means a lot to me. And it's a great way to encourage other people who aren't as open with their maybe their psychological or neurological difficulties that they're facing. And so being a face that they can see and look at as an example of kind of not really overcoming, but powering through it, is something that really matters. And I think as long as we're talking about it, people are learning from us, they're feeling empowered. And that's really what it's about for me. And also it helps me to calm me down in a moment in some instances. If you name that thing that is preventing you from feeling or doing something, then you can oftentimes get through it with the confidence that it's named. If you see it pop up, you're not surprised by it. Also, like if you see me stutter, if you see me like get off track or ramble on or talk too fast, it's because I've named this thing that makes me that way. And so I felt that it's been a lot better for me since I've been more transparent about the struggles that I have. And also to Wesley's point, I mean, I've had times where I was in a wheelchair for just like a day or two, but I had torn an ACL. So we all have the ability to enter into the disability community at any time. It's one of the only few underrepresented or marginalized identity factors that it can go up and down like this, where oftentimes you think you're good and then next thing you know, something happens and you're a part of the community. So being more conscious and more considerate towards this community is good karma for yourself. But
exactly.
It's just like, why would you not just behave in this way? Because we all can enter into the community at any time and lose a capability like that. And so I'm fortunate to be where I am today, but I remember not being able to walk, to run, to sit down on the toilet, even just like your basic things, right? So we take it for granted. We have to keep talking about it and making people realize that there are challenges that we can all make people's experience more inclusive and accessible and create belonging.
Thank you for sharing, Gina. Quick question, because I love the fact of like the owning the masking and then talking about the transparency and vulnerability of demasking in some sense, right? Because what I find with invisible disabilities is that most individuals in the workforce are dealing with invisible disabilities in some sort. And the conversations are, how do I own it within the workspace to not be judged? How is navigating that for you? Like, did you just mask it within the spaces that you were in, that you were social in? And then like at home, like you said, like some people, if they were by you, they knew, right? Or was it the other way around? Like you masked it at home, but you owned it at work? Or like, what was that for you? And then how did you navigate it to make it just your identity as a whole?
Yeah. Good question. So one of the bad side effects of masking is that you have to take that mask off. And when you take that mask off, it hits you in a weight that you've been holding it, right? So like if you do something and you're like holding it back, it's like holding back a dam. And then you release the dam and then it all just comes pouring out. Yeah. And so when we take our mask off finally. There's a lot of exhaustion. There's oftentimes guilt. There's oftentimes just like the feelings of being very overwhelmed. And so I was finding if I was masking a lot, I would come home and I would literally just lay there and like be zoned out. Just I'm wiped, like, because I have put so much effort. I've put all of my, we call them spoons. If people in the disability community are very familiar with spoons, but I put all my spoons into preparing for this public speaking thing, right? And now, right afterwards, I'm completely done. I have no spoons to even do the smallest thing, like feed myself. And so I needed to be more conscious about how much masking I was doing because I was using all of my energy in one space, and it's not a healthy tactic to do. And also, like, our neurodivergencies are not something to be ashamed of either. We all have little things that we do, and the more that we normalize these characteristics, the less I have to wear a mask and the person after me has to wear a mask. And so it's a delicate balance about it. I mean, I think I do it still frequently if I'm public speaking, talking to my board of directors, right, in a space where I feel like I may be judged more than others, because we have this natural instinct to want to be liked and to want to be seen as, not somebody who's going to have an impairment. But the truth of the matter is the people that you're talking to, even in my board of directors, a lot of them have their own different disabilities. So it's still a constant reminder to be honest and true with myself, even in those spaces, and especially in those spaces, because those people have the power and often have the access to the funding. So the more I talk about it and the more I feel comfortable, the more change that can happen.
Nice. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And I hope someone that is listening, especially to that, can kind of understand the process and the layers to it, because for me, mine is visible. So I feel like the ownership is different. I have to like own it as soon as I go out the door in some sense. But through my work, I've definitely came in contact with individuals that aren't really seen with disabilities right away. You got people that are suffering with MS, but maybe they got diagnosed at an early stage. So they're still physical, but 10 years down the line, it could be something different, or they could prepare for it now if it's more welcoming in the space. But because of just using one of those. And so anyone that is dealing with something, like, literally, if you like, own it in the best way and find a safe space where you can communicate with someone, even if it's just starting with one colleague that you trust enough to share, like, hey, I go through this struggle, because they could be the advocate for you. I've definitely learned that, like, have that buddy system of someone that you can trust to kind of build that trust system within your institution, especially if these conversations are going around, because you can be involved in them. So
I love that, Wesley. Advocacy and finding an ally in this whole conversation. I think about, like, all three of us have some form of disability, and for a long time I was like, I'm abled, I'm fine, which that was my ableist mindset, right? And so having, like, when you brought up MS, I think about my autoimmune of lupus, and it's not seen. And there are times I literally cannot walk. Like, I literally cannot walk. And what hit me with all three of us is, like, Wes, you don't have a choice per se, right? Your disability is visible, and people are going to engage with you because they're like, oh, you're a wheelchair user. Gina and myself, they don't see it. And that sense of shame for all of us. And I think you were just talking about this, Wes, the fact that you have to prove something, and you're not just believed, you're not just supported, you're not just lifted up in where you are. Like, we're not lying, you know what I mean? And that stigma that comes, it's unfortunate. You know what I mean, Gina?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, like, shame and guilt whenever you don't have like the awareness physically of someone's disability, or even yourself, like, holding that shame and guilt. And that is not something that is going to help anybody. Right. Like you said, there's a lot of people with chronic pain, chronic illnesses beyond just, like, what we're talking about, neurodivergencies. And from whenever you find out that somebody does have one and you have not treated them in an inclusive way, it's always an eye opener to treat everybody with kindness and grace, right? And so I think the topic of giving grace to all folks and not just holding it for people that you can see with a visible disability is really important for us to move forward in that type of way too.
Absolutely. Go ahead, April. I want you to keep that idea.
Well, I was going to ask another question. So if yours is in the vein, but I
Nope,
wanted to.
It's not. It's not.
Okay. I'm like, so many things are going on in my head. I'm thinking of, I just watched Simone Biles on Netflix, and how, people were condemning her for stepping out of the 2020 Tokyo Olympics because, and our mindset of our society, right? But we can't see, she didn't break an ankle, she didn't break a leg. What's wrong with her? Why does she need to take time off? And that speaks to what we're talking about. And then, Gina, I want to ask you, and you may or may not have familiarity with this, but when we talk about intersectionality, Wes and I had on a woman a few years ago. Wes, I did look. We did start in 2020. It was November and December of 2020. But Ashley Lawrence and her twin sister. Oh, Gina's a twin. I'm telling all your business, Gina.
Oh, wow.
I didn't even, that just came to me when I said it out loud. But she and her twin sister were in a car accident, and I think they both have SCIs. Am I correct? They're both wheelchair users. And Ashley, they're Puerto Rican. But a lot of the stuff that has come against her as well is that she's queer, and like, oh my God, you can't be disabled and, Latina and queer. And that's just awful. And I wanted to understand if you have experiences in the LGBTQA community or that you've advocated for, or you've seen or not. I'm just curious about the population of those of us who are disabled, and I also identify outside of what the patriarchal white supremacist society says we should be.
And just real quick, Gina, just so you know, that was going to be my question too.
We're there, Wesley. Since 2020 is helping. Okay. All right. I think, so I was working at Vibrant Pittsburgh, and we sometimes, we have these conversations that are really set to one community of marginalization or one community of underrepresentation, where we're talking about somebody who is Black, right? Or we're talking about the LGBTQ community, like you said, or we're talking about the disability community, and realizing that there are those that sit at those intersectional identities is something that we cannot grasp for some reason. We automatically default that this is the Black community, this is the disability community, this is the queer community, and there we belong often to multiple different levels. And Kimberly Crenshaw coining the term of intersectionality, it has been so important, but people still don't know the word. And the word of intersectionality basically means that you can belong to more than one marginalized identity or community. And that plays a double factor in how you experience the world, right? So being a disabled woman of color who is also LGBTQ plays a factor in how you are faced with different challenges and can move freely within the world. And one of the things that we were doing back in Vibrant when we were talking about Pride Month was, really just digging into how should we celebrate this? And, someone from the community, who from the disability community was making us more aware of the fact that a lot of folks in the community really can't even have marriage equality yet in the disability community based off of the need to stay below a certain financial income level, and based off of things that are preventing them from feeling like they can be married plus be successful financially. And so there still is not marriage equality for a lot of people in the disability community. And I think so many of us don't know that and aren't aware of the challenges that people have. And yeah, it's difficult. But also another side note is that there are way more people in the LGBTQ community than the straight community who are disabled. So if you are disabled in one way or another, you're much more likely to be queer of some sort, whether it's gender queer or your sexual orientation. Those are the facts of the data right now. Not sure of the correlation. There's lots of different studies out there going back to study it, but there's definitely a correlation between the two. And just making sure that whenever we're creating things like Pride, that we're thinking about, well, how will we get a wheelchair into this space? How will this be for somebody who has sound, sensory issues? And like, how do we keep that in mind when we're also creating things for specific communities already? And so that's something that I really try to do whenever we're creating events within the museum and other spaces is, all right, do we have a quiet space? Do we have a space and a plan in place that we can articulate and put on our invitation for people to understand what the experience is like from start to finish? If you have to be in a wheelchair or if you have to wear earplugs in certain spaces because of the sound being a hindrance for you. And so making sure that that intentionality is baked into every event or everything in program that you do is highly important. So yes, intersectionality is huge.
Thank you for sharing, because I think you nailed it. The more and more I see disabled activists, the more and more I see individuals owning that level of intersectionality. And then of course, like I want to kind of, for you, when it comes to like you speaking about it, have you found, because of course I've spoke about like being Black and disabled and not knowing, like, you know, even within the Black community, the acceptance. So have you found, we've had those conversations about disability within the Black community, but how is disability seen in the Latin community, the Latino community, when it comes to like your visibility? Like, do you feel like it's easy to own it within your community as well to raise awareness? Because like we found that like, and there's a lot of conversation around Blackness and disability and how that identity too has an issue within the community itself. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, you know, because like, have you found that the conversation is easier to go with talking about it to other communities and bringing awareness, and a little bit more harder to go within your community, or have you found it being welcoming all around?
And when you say my community, are you talking about the LGBTQ community or which community?
Gina's biracial. She's Black and
oh yeah, I should have put that in my disclaimer. I'm very racially ambiguous, so oftentimes people don't know what my racial background is. I am Black biracial, so my dad is African American, my mom is Italian. Makes me come out looking like I could be anybody's kid, though.
I love it.
Well, but even that, right? Like, so even being Italian, is there a strong hold on that, or were you just more within like the, you know, because my daughter's biracial, but of course she's probably been around me more. So is there a balance within that, like with your identities when it comes to that? That's what I'm kind of getting more into, not kind of like the other, but really like your ethnicity, more or less, and like the acceptance within that coming from your disability, as well as like the other things you intersect with.
I mean, I think speaking about like the Black community, and I don't really like, I mean, I would say I have like an Italian culture, but I think we always anticipate, because the community is already kind of marginalized or has experienced prejudice against them, that they might have more empathy towards the disability community. And that correlation just does not seem to be there for some reason. For me personally, what I've experienced, I can't speak for people. But I know that oftentimes when I have talked about having ADHD or anxiety, it's been one of those things for me, like if I think about like how people have responded, where it's been like, just pray about it, soldier through it. It's not real. It's just, you're not strong enough. Like that type of language has come through for me in a lot of different populations there, where I was like kind of surprised, like, oh, okay. But it's not necessarily our fault either. I think Like thinking of, I mean, I definitely identify as Black. And so when I think of like how Black boys have been treated because they have ADHD, how Black women have been highly misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed for having ADHD and been otherwise considered difficult or too talkative or all of these other things, or not focused, it is because we have been treated unfairly already by this system. And even when we have had diagnoses, it has not helped us to progress in one way or the other. So naming that disability is even a problem for specific marginalized community. And we have seen how when we are naming having a disability, that the medical system is still not helping us with the same health outcomes. It's a really great book by Mary Crossley called Embodied Injustice. And I saw her speak last year. She came to Pittsburgh for a part of the Pittsburgh Arts and Lecture series. But she's been doing work for a very long time in the city of Pittsburgh and across the United States. But Embodied Injustice is about the intersection of race, disability, and health. And hearing her speak and talk about the health outcomes specifically for Black folks is so disheartening, because you realize that even if you have that named diagnosis, you're not going to be treated any better, with any type of consideration that takes into, hey, maybe there's some other things here that are preventing them from having access to healthcare. So like, how can we help out? But there's still more of that awareness that needs to happen. And there's still a lot of trust that needs to happen between the Black community and the LGBTQ community and the health industry, the healthcare system, because the healthcare system has not always been our friend. And I think in order to have an honest conversation about this, there needs to be more reparations about how we have been harmed by these systems that are established to assist us and to heal us, but have historically been predatory against us. You think of like the history of gynecology in America, utilizing Black bodies, Black women without consent, without anesthesia. You think of the Tuskegee, you think of all of these things. You think of Black men being infected with syphilis purposefully to see the effects of medication without their consent. We have to have these conversations. We have to talk about how we have been treated unfairly and how we should potentially not trust the healthcare system as much before we can get to the point where we're able to name our diagnosis and then trust that that system is also going to help us. So I think that's also a part of the cultural experience of being Black with a disability or being biracial or another racial minority, ethnic minority, and accepting and working with the system.
Gina, we're dropping bombs, dropping knowledge.
Thank you for that. Thank you for just even educating me a little bit more, just from your perspective. It was great.
I wrote down that book, Embodied Injustice, Race, Disability, and Health, Mary Crossley. Is that correct?
Yes, and it just came out. It's a post. Well, actually, she was writing it in 2020 and had to extend it because of what was happening with COVID and wanting to really articulate more of the injustices that were happening to Black folks during the pandemic that were living with disabilities. The statistics in it are enlightening and very, very disappointing. But I think we need to keep making that awareness a part of our learning and a part of our story. Yeah,
I was thinking of your question, Wes, and listening to you, Gina. And Gina, when you said it's not our fault, there is in cultures that are marginalized, and I know strongly because I'm Black, so I'll say in Black cultures, but I think in most cultures, when you are marginalized in like America, which is, white, patriarchal, like that's the top, right? You cannot be seen as weak. You cannot be seen as vulnerable. So we instill that in one another, right? Like, stop crying. Don't let them see you weak. Don't let them see you suffer because you feel like you're going to be preyed upon. Or like Gina, you were saying, you can't trust the medical system. And it's unfortunate because we get harmed further, although we get into the medical system and we're also harmed there. So I think that's part of it too, Wes, when we look at different cultures within America, at least, like we're trying to protect ourselves and hold ourselves back. And some of it's to the detriment of our own well-being. And that's why, we're having these conversations so we can talk about the lived experiences that we all have and share the knowledge that we're learning with others. So
absolutely. No, so when it comes to I want to kind of bring it in. So when it comes to like the ableism, the intersectionality, we have like equity is also like a part of this conversation. And like we talked about like the structures when it comes to ADA, you have all of these things where there are still barriers, but we can probably find a way to create some type of medium, some balance. Like Gina, what do you see like when it comes to like, even like right now, how can we make spaces equal in some sense for everybody? Like, so like, what do you see that even, of course, again, still thinking we need ramps, we need elevators, we need everything, right? Like some places got stairs, right? But what is like, just even if it's just one idea, what is, what should people take from this to say, okay, even though there's work to be done, this is how you can create some type of equality within your space now?
I mean,
equity over equality, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like,
yeah. And I think we're in this space too, where we're like, oh, we started with equality. Now we're on equity. Now we're also on liberation. And I think a lot of my work that I want to shift is towards liberation, is towards removing the barriers, providing the resources, providing the connections, so that people can have the power to move forward on their own, even too, right? Like, I don't want people to constantly think that they have to operate within a system, but that they can get rid of the systems that have created the disability. Because often, we know that the disability is created by systems. It's not called a disability. I have ADHD, I have anxiety. The disability is created by the systems that I have to operate in. And I think that is something that we have to reframe for ourselves as people living with disabilities. And I think it's something that we have to reframe for people who want to help us. And so what I need to be free to operate and tell you what I need. And I need you to listen. And I need you to be able to say, all right, this is a consideration. This is an accommodation. You're good to go with that. Here's how you go through the process of requesting it. And I think one of the most basic things we can do is to remind people what it looks like to ask for accommodations and to prompt people to report the needs for accommodations and to find the money to get things done to make those accommodations realistic. It's so basic, but it's still where we're at. Like, I constantly have different employees who say, I have this accommodation. How do I make sure that HR knows about it? I didn't put it on whenever I first got hired, or it happened after I got hired, right? Because that happens. And so just really clearly articulating what the processes are within our systems that we're forced to kind of operate in until we have liberation is a key to success. And that's something that anybody can do, that a coworker, that a peer can do, just constantly talking about it, raising awareness about it. And then that helps us to know where we need to allocate funds as an institution once we see like if there's a huge sum of people who are asking for the same accommodation, well, let's just make that something that we do for every employee. We need unlimited PTO. Let's make that something that we do for every employee. And then we're creating what has long become known as the curb effect, because when we started to implement curbs on sidewalks, we saw that was something that helped not just people who are in wheelchairs, but people in strollers, people with bicycles, people who are delivering packages, right? And I don't want us to think that these accommodations are just for people with disabilities. When we do what's right for one person, it's what's right for the larger sum of folks. And you'll see the effects of that. And everybody will start to feel more liberated in the way that they're able to move within the spaces and places. And they'll start to feel like they belong and they can bring people with them who they were, nervous about before potentially bringing into this space because it wasn't accommodating, it wasn't accessible. And the accessibility also has to extend beyond just thinking of disability, but the mental and psychological accessibility to places and spaces. Because I think a lot of us think that we don't belong in places and spaces because we don't see ourselves represented. So that is another way of like continuously talking about it. But like, how do we create psychological accessibility, making people see that they belong in a space and that there is a path to get into that space if they haven't been there before?
Speaking of spaces, just no pun intended, but bars, I made a post the other day, and it's just one thing. Most bars allocate a large bar top, right? Like, but they're always used for storage.
Like the bar top is supposed to be for wheelchair use.
But it's always cups, drinks, menus. I mean, no matter where I go. And everyone's like, oh man, like when I come in, they're like, and it's the stigma where you don't even want to go back, or it's the conversation. So like making things very welcoming is very important. But you had some solid points there, Gina.
Yeah, I was typing
away. Answer that question the way you did. I don't know if I knew that solely, but you did such a great job.
Right? Like I'm sitting here, liberation. Gina, you're going to see some quotes in our newsletter. I'm going to have to add you to the newsletter because
yes, please.
Thank you. And you brought up some things and we'll, tie it up. But talking about marriage equality, we've talked about that, but we've touched on it. And I feel as though this is the first conversation that we've had, Wes, with someone where you talk about, right, ADA and the money. Like you really talked about the funding and the budget and the lack of resources. And that's something I think it deserves like more attention, later on or some other point, but that's super important.
I just shared that with someone recently. I said, there's a lack of education when it comes to the funding, even for people with disabilities to understand what can they do, So like you said, like the marriage equality, like if I have to stay at this certain bracket, I don't want to mess that up because it could be detrimental to but to understand. And then the market doesn't understand either. You go, yeah, it's just a lot of barriers within those systems too, that like you said, I would love to talk about it more because I think it's one of those things that people don't talk about.
Yeah. We're definitely going to have to make another date for sure, Gina. You mentioned one book. What we want to hear from you about go back. Our platform. I know I have dogs over here too. No sorries needed. I'm dog sitting, and there's like so much fun stuff going on. We want to hear about what you do. Like our main platform is grounding and centering us all in this aspect of well-being for ourselves, and how do we do that? And we want to hear every person's lived experience as they come on, because we share knowledge and we share wisdom. So curious to know like what you're doing for your well-being and for your health and maintaining your sanity. What are you reading? What do you do? And podcast, music, all those things. We'd love to hear if you're so willing to share.
Yeah. So I am the first thing that I'll mention is that I think it's really important, and I appreciate you bringing that back forward, because I almost like turned down doing this podcast because I've like had a really heavy work week, and I'm like, I don't know that I have spoons left for this. To be honest, on a Sunday like this week, I helped to co-facilitate something called the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute. We brought in about 80 people from across the region and the country. Actually, we had a couple people from California. And it was a lot of talking about race and in interracial spaces too. So I used a lot of my mental capacity in that role this week. And so I was really like, I want my rest on Sunday. And I think that's big, is like respecting yourself. And when you name something, you give it to yourself.
Yeah.
But I wanted to have this conversation because then you were like, oh, it's about wellness and it's about disability. And I'm like, all right, because I have had an experience this week, and I think that leaning into talking about the wellness and how we experience self-care is really important. So yesterday, I mean, I did the thing I wanted to do. I stayed in bed pretty late. And even if I wasn't just like asleep, I was just resting my body and recuperating from what was kind of not traumatic, but we have a lot of racial trauma. And I think if we don't, that's another form of a disability, but we have racial trauma. And when we bring it up for 8 hours a day for 5 days in a row, like that can take its toll on people when you're like being reminded and asked to like tally or think about the things that you've been through. And, so I needed to kind of like heal myself from that. And one of the ways was just rest. Another thing that I do every day is, and this isn't a plug or anything because I'm not affiliated, but I really, really love the app called Calm.
Yeah.
The Calm app. And there's a free version. So like, I always recommend people doing the free version too, because you can get a ton out of it just for downloading it for free. And I've subscribed to it for at least 6 years now. I'm probably an early adopter of it. So every day I listen to Jay Shetty, who's like a really fantastic mindfulness coach. And I do like the daily Calm. And then there's like a bunch of other professionals that are on there. I mean, like, and they've expanded it. So there are a ton of famous people on the app now too, who do like nighttime stories.
Like Idris Elba doing the nighttime story.
My favorite nighttime story is called Lavender Fields. And so I will listen to it anytime I'm too stressed to fall asleep. And it's the same story. And it's probably some of my neurodivergency, because it's like, I only want that story. I don't care about the other hundreds of stories on there. I know what helps me. And so I love that app. And I also do something called the Habits Nest book, which another thing I don't get paid for. I'm just always trying to find best practices because of my ADHD. I have to establish regimens. And it's one of the things that I'm trying to do. I've tried it like 5 other times and I have failed. I'm on like my 5th try of starting and stopping this book called the Habits Nest. But part of my Habits Nest practice is to establish a morning routine and a nighttime routine. And I have built the daily Calm into my Habits Nest routine. So like doing that. And I've also built positive affirmations, listening to a happy song, like things like that are very small, but actually help my mental health and help me with recovery and help me recuperate for the next day that is coming ahead. So that's something I do. And I'm really big into books, like audiobooks.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this again. I keep throwing out my ADHD. It's like,
throw it on out.
Once you have an explanation for how you are, it's just so enjoyable to like actually accommodate yourself in the way that you need to. So audiobooks allow me to listen to books in faster speed than I can read them in. And I love listening to audiobooks at like 1.5 times speed.
Oh, really?
That's the minimum I will do it. I mean, sometimes I go up to like 2 times the speed because my ability to process is really quick. And so I've been doing that with Audible. And there's a couple books that I have told myself to like dig into because I find myself only reading academic books about race and injustices and things like that. So I've started to like do books that are nonfiction or that are fiction, but also tied into race and injustice and things. So Angie Thomas, in her trilogy of books called The Hate You Give, which is super famous. Concrete Jungle also came out of that trilogy, and On the Come Up. And I just finished all 3 of those books on audiobook, and they were so good. And so, so that's how I'm like, all right, how do I not make myself always trauma bonded to like books about race and like homophobia and racism and all of these horrible things. But like, how can I read a story or listen to a story that is still going to teach me at the same time and make me feel like I'm relaxing, but learning. And so that trilogy of books, and I'm happy to share my book list with anybody because there are a lot of other good books. And I'm about to read the book that was recommended to me by Sony Toname, who runs the Pittsburgh Arts and Lecture Series. But this book is called Madness. And the subtitle is Race and Insanity in a Jim Crow Asylum. And it's by Antonia Hilton. And she is actually coming to Pittsburgh. So before she comes, I want to make sure I finish that book. But she's coming for this current cycle of the Pittsburgh Arts and Lecture Series. Really important.
Is that soon?
I believe she'll be here in the fall. I'm not sure exactly, but the season goes until like March of 25. So she'll be here between now and then. Okay. I can remind you. I can share that with you all.
Thank you. I want to hear that. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I was thinking, like I'm furiously typing away, and I did it on a different computer because last time I was doing it on live stream, and everybody was like, "April, we can hear you." And I appreciate you saying too, like sometimes you just want to read or listen to something that just lets you be free, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll share with you all. This is my guilty pleasure. I think Wes, you would appreciate this. I just played it for you both know Quincy. TGIF by Glorilla.
Go there, April. I like this song. Me too. We are gonna go.
Me too. I'm a fan of Glow right now. So
I appreciate that. And then I went to Pilates class. So I've been doing Pilates. I've been trying to walk and do Pilates to take care of myself. My Pilates teacher, I was leaving class. She's like, April, I got a book for you, which I thought was so touching. It's called The Mindful Body. And the Arthur's mother had cancer and died, and she felt like there's so many things that could have been offered to her mother, right? And as a female in this medical system. And so the book is just really enlightening on ways that you can take care of yourself, even when you're dealing with like a chronic illness. And then Gina, I've been listening to an audiobook, like trilogy, Children of Blood and Bone. Are you all familiar with that? I read it like 2-3 years ago. I'll have to
now. Sorry if you can hear me typing.
No, it is so good. It's on the third. She's on. I don't want to mess up her name completely. The third book is Children of Anguish and Anarchy, and the book series. It's like a Harry Potter, but it's African based. And so it's like the Magi and the Titans, and it's so.
I'm here for it.
Oh my God!
We need a new Harry Potter because we have canceled that author. So
yeah, that part right there. Her books are so good. So I'll drop them in the chat while Wesley, you share what you're listening to and what you're doing.
Absolutely. So right now I am resting. I had a little break from like my nonprofit work where one of our programs stopped. So just really giving myself time to get ready for the next things that we got to do, as well as like family, hanging out with family, play cards with my brothers and sisters last night, like things like that, like really understanding the social connections as a professional, especially with your family, instead of just always being so tired, because I have been. So like yesterday, gave myself time to do something different. No work, no computer, no nothing. Like really trying to do that. When I travel, I'm trying to keep it away. But the only thing that I'm listening to right now, because I am definitely trying to get back to reading, is the book that was recommended to us the last talk, was The Nonviolent Communication.
Yes, Marshall Rosenberg. Yes.
Someone just mentioned that to me.
It's really.
You would love it.
It's so
that means I need to get it, because when that happens in doubles, I'm like, all right.
Absolutely. It is it's something that I'm taking, like being patient with listening to, but it is good. It's really good, especially as just a communicator. So yep, that's what I would recommend to anybody. That book is like good. It really just allows you to see yourself in different perspectives. It's not attacking. It's really just transparent. I love it.
Yeah. I really, when I was doing my coaching cert, they required us to read it, and I completely understand. Marshall Rosenberg. I put it in the chat, and I also put Children of Blood and Bone. Tomi, I don't want to mispronounce her name, Adeyemi, in Nigerian. And Cynthia Erivo is narrating this last book. And I'm going to go back and did she narrate all 3 books? If you all aren't familiar with Cynthia Erivo, she's kind of forever. She was the #1 warrior. So
I will be buying this trilogy from my bookshelf.
it is so good. I will say the second book was a sophomore book. It wasn't as impactful, but I say listen to all 3. This third one's good. So listen, want to give you all back your Sunday. Gina, thank you for sitting and sharing and giving of your time. And I'm going to share the spoon theory in our newsletter so people are familiar with that. I'm glad you did that, Gina.
Look up spoons, spoonies. Some people there's a whole spoonie community.
I didn't realize there's a whole spoonie community. I need to be.
And I have to give credit to my twin sister taught me that we have, because we're twins, we have very similar things that we deal with. And
yeah. Well, we would love to have you back. Everyone, we talked about ADA anniversary, and it was only in 1990 that it became a law to make facilities and institutions accessible for those with disabilities. That's a very long time that it wasn't even enforced or required. And even though it's law, I don't know how many people are really still following it. It is Disability Pride. Wes and I, we've shared with you the last couple of years how we came to Pittsburgh and had a really interesting time in a torrential monsoon, which I'm not exaggerating, during that. But Gina shared that you think Disability Pride is going to be in Pittsburgh at Shinley. Did you say you thought maybe in Shinley Park or something?
Yes, it's the last few years it has been in Shinley Plaza. I can drop some information if you want to include that in your newsletter. It's in August.
Okay. Okay. And then Wesley, I don't know if you could share Kansas City if they're doing any Disability Pride stuff.
Yeah, when we started. I'm coming, Kansas City. We're going to start it real soon because somebody got to do it.
There you go.
Maybe one. I have a site that has all of the national ones, but the Pittsburgh one is August 24th at the Shenley Plaza.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I'll see, Wesley, if there's anyone close by. Make sure that you get you one. You can always come to Pittsburgh too if it works out for you. So
oh, the rain.
Yes. Yeah. It hasn't been raining here. It's been hot, but not rainy.
I need to come. I need to go through the tunnel and see amazing. I'm still stuck on that, Marissa. But all right, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Gina. Take your day. I hope you have lots of rest. Same for you, Wesley, and everyone else. Thank you for being here with us on episode. You said 42, Wes?
42.
Look at us. Look at us. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us and listening to the podcast. If you would like more information on the guests and the stories that you've heard today, and to hear stories from others, subscribe to the podcast. We also invite you to subscribe to Open Up Pittsburgh's newsletter, as well as our YouTube channel. We want you all to take care, and remember to make your own stories. This is April. Peace.